Hello everyone, today I'd like to talk about the future of Naval and what I see being added as we go along in this game mode. Now I can't talk about the future without talking about the latest update, which added in the boiler explosion mechanic. This is basically making it so that if your engines are damaged or your boilers, they have the chance of exploding, and this can be mitigated by backing off on your throttle and lowering the pressure of your boilers, so there is some counterplay there, thankfully. And what I think they're trying to do with this is just make ships easier to kill, and I don't see this as a bad thing because the engine explosion mechanic isn't like a shell room explosion. It's not as damaging to your ship, though I do think it will be killing a lot of crew since your boiler rooms do tend to be fairly heavily crew loaded. I do think, however, they're making ships easier to kill and putting more emphasis on armor schemes and component layouts, per what weaknesses you can exploit when you're placing your shots. Some ships have very hard ammunition storages to hit, whereas their engines might be a lot more exposed and easier to land shots on. I think overall they're trying to make it easier for you to take out ships, but they're trying to move away from just having you shoot at the turrets to make the ammo explode. They're giving you more ways to do it based on how those ships are built. While I'm not totally happy to see ships being easier to kill because I do enjoy the slugging matches, it is nice that they're going about it this way where you can exploit certain weaknesses in ships in order to get the advantage and kill them a little bit faster. Now I can't just sing the praises of this update because they did add in another arcade aiming bug that just kind of throws your shots off like you didn't even aim them. So if you have been seeing that, you're not going crazy, but I will save that for a different video. Moving into ship types that they could add, I do want to start with submarines. I expect to see these this year as they do seem to be in the final stages of development. They did mention that the holdup is being the implementation of them into current gameplay, and I can see a lot of reasons why this is being a problem for them. If they spawn them at the current blue water spawns on a lot of the larger maps, the entire match could be over before the submarines actually get into the battle. I'm sure some of the faster ones could do it on the surface, but that leaves them very exposed to battleship fire, and I'm pretty sure a 15-inch shell will not react kindly to a submarine, especially with the flooding mechanics. Now the opposite side of that is if they make submarine spawns that are fairly close to the enemy team, they could be very broken as suddenly you have submarines that battleships can't really deal with being brought into these matches where there really isn't anything to counter them. And I kind of have a problem with this as it forces people to bring coastals and destroyers that they don't want to play into these matches and possibly wasting one or more of their spawns trying to kill a submarine that's harassing their team. So I really hope they don't do it this way, as I don't like the idea of forcing people to play something they don't want to. It's kinda like telling ground players that if they don't like close air support, just bring a plane into the match. Well, maybe they didn't want to do that today. And one of the last problems I see with this is the maps currently are not deep enough for submarines. They are barely deep enough to sink the current capital ships that we have, and some maps aren't even deep enough for that, to the point where they stick up or catch other battleships as they're sailing around. And I see a lot of development time being dumped into that, I'd imagine, just because that's a whole underwater environment that you have to create, even though a lot of it's going to be empty water, I assume. And the problem with that on top of that is if the game can even handle that extra map size. Because I know that Naval has had problems before. We've dealt with stuttering problems until very recently, and I'm very concerned that adding in this extra depth could stress the game engine that little bit more. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe it'll all be fine. It's just a concern that I have. Now moving off of that, and a good transition here is coastals. These should be incentivized to be brought into blue water matches just to mix it up a bit. I think they really should add in a mechanic like aircraft spawning in arcade where you get a free spawn of them if you participate in the match, even if you don't own a coastal for that specific nation. Now I also think these shouldn't cost respawns, it should work just like the planes mechanic, but the coastal line can be incentivized to be ground out as well because say maybe the free spawn only gives you the reserves, whereas if you have ground down the coastal line, you get a better boat to use during that match as your free spawn, and maybe the free spawns can't be used till later in the match, like the current planes, whereas if you bring your own coastal, you can spawn that right off the get-go. So I think you could incentivize people actually utilizing the line in that way, even though I still think that the coastal economy itself is a little bit nutty. The 4.0s should not have the same cost as a 8.7 battleship. I think this would also help with multiple issues, as with the submarine implementation issue, suddenly people would have something to counter those submarines. Say if their battleship got sunk by a submarine, they'd at least have a free counter to go deal with that, rather than having to waste one of their respawns on a coastal, or spawning another battleship and just hoping the submarine doesn't bother them again. It also helps with the matches being over quickly because of one coastal capping very early in the match. Now, somebody who had a battleship sink early on could spawn a coastal, go try to take those capture zones back, and prevent the match from ending so quickly. Up next, I'd like to talk about carriers and carrier hybrids. And while I don't think that carriers would actually work in War Thunder Naval, I think the hybrids might actually have a chance. Full carriers themselves wouldn't work because the current map sizes and mechanics just means they will get nuked off of spawns with barely any ability to defend themselves, because everybody would just see them as an easy target, or just see them as a bother that needs to get shot first. Hybrids at least would retain a lot of their armor and armament from when they were a previous, say, battleship or cruiser, and have at least that ability to defend themselves, deflect shots, that sort of thing. On top of that, I think full carriers wouldn't work just because outside of the fact that there's no current mechanic for full plane squadron control, the current float plane mechanics, say if you were just single launching planes, leave the home ship very vulnerable while you're actually flying the planes. A lot of times your ship will either stop, just sail in a straight line, or do small circles based on your last input. And of course you can swap back and forth between flying and controlling your ship, but still that won't save you in a lot of matches. So I think it would just get the carriers killed very early on, especially by the ship that was being bothered by their planes, or thought they were going to be bothered. I think hybrid carriers though could still work, as they could single launch attack planes or just more heavily armed scouts, and they would still have their offensive armament to be able to deal with ships while their planes were en route or doing other stuff like refitting, repairing, that sort of thing. And I think they still would be more vulnerable to damage than their normal counterparts, because they do have that added plane ordnance storage, and I don't think their flight decks would be deflecting a lot of shots. And lastly, I'd like to talk about modern ships and anti-ship missiles, both of which I don't see being very viable currently. I think the more modern ships with less armor would be glass cannons, since they're basically built to not even see the enemy and deflect any incoming fire with their close-in weapon systems. But I don't think those would work against battleship salvos. And especially on some of the smaller maps, I see them just getting decimated. These ships would also have limited firepower outside of their missiles, so if they were out of missiles, they just wouldn't really be able to fight back if something with a decent armament rolled up to fight them. I think the anti-ship missiles themselves would be very broken, as currently the surface-to-air missile destroyers that we already have can already nuke other ships with the missiles that are not even made for that purpose. They can be very monstrous if you don't take them out. The majority of ships that are already in game would basically have no counter to anti-ship missiles, outside of trying to sink the originating ship, which I think could be a problem in some cases if it is playing smart. And I'm not really sure where modern ships with anti-ship missiles would fit into the battle rating range. They would probably need their own brackets and maps, since the current map sizes would be fairly small for them, and not allow much more than just firing a missile and trying to dodge all the incoming ones, as both teams would basically be spawning on each other in terms of missile combat. I would, however, like to see the old Cold War conversions like USS Little Rock if those ships did support surface-to-air missiles. Those would be kind of cool because it's like the hybrid carriers. They kind of give up their offensive weaponry for that niche use of the surface-to-air missile, or of course with how surface-to-air missiles act in game, they could pop a couple of ships really quick and then just fall back to using their limited armament. So I think those would be rather interesting, but I really don't think that modern ships and anti-ship missiles should come anytime soon, as I don't think they would fit into the current gameplay loop. They'd be very feast or famine, and I really see them being more feast than famine, just because anti-ship missiles would be rather broken, I think. But that's all I had for you guys today. I just wanted to talk about where I see this going, especially on the submarine front, because I'm fairly certain we're going to see them this year. And that's all I had. Good luck out there, guys. I'll see you in the next one.